Now, a while ago on social media, it was a big thing for people to ask men if they were okay. Now, speaking as a guy, the short answer is no. No, we're not. If you want the short answer, that's it. But if you want the long answer, stay tuned and I will openly give it to you. And I'm not going to beat around the bush, I'm not going to bullshit you. I'm going to straight up go into why it is men are not okay. Men are not okay because they're brought up, even from the position of being young boys in their childhood, that whatever sign of pain and discomfort they feel, they have to stuff it down and pretend that whatever is upsetting them or going on does not hurt them. Even when you're a kid, things like you throw like a girl, don't be a girl. Things like that boys say to other boys and parents say to their sons. It may not seem like it's doing a lot of damage, but in the long run, it instills that kind of sensibility early on that any display of weakness or any sign of vulnerability makes that man or boy look feminine and therefore makes him look weaker and inferior to his contemporaries and peers. This is like a common thing that a lot of people in adolescent and pediatric psychology notice, is that young children and teenagers and people that are still kids but not quite teenagers, they all display an aversion to being seen as weak, so they will often play off and more or less downplay things that deeply affect them to the point where they feel like the best thing to do whenever they're confronted with something is to pretend that it does not affect them or just keep burying it and burying it and burying it and burying it until it is just slowly killing them inside. And the problem is, it's not just fostered in your early childhood, it's also fostered in your teenage years. Whenever, for example, you have a relationship fall apart in middle school and high school, more often than not, the appropriate response when someone has a relationship fall apart when it comes to being a boy is that you are supposed to walk away, head held high, and pretend it had no effect on you. Now, a lot of relationships in middle school and high school, they're kind of short and sweet. Some of them are very brief to the point where you really don't get very attached to each other, because a lot of it is just a brief relationship that there really was no basis or foundation for. Therefore, there was no real deep connection, and the relationship wouldn't hurt as bad if it ends on bad terms. But the issue is more like just that callous disregard for how a human being handles the concept of rejection. And even if the relationship fails, even if you're not rejected upon the initial establishing of the relationship, it's still the rejection that follows later when the relationship just inevitably fails. That natural feeling of rejection and resentment may be another reason that people in high school and middle school might not often pursue relationships as an adult. It's because that anxiety and uncertainty of whether or not a relationship has decent longevity will be a reason why these people may avoid relationships, and they may potentially turn resentful, spiteful, or maybe even angry, possibly even vengeful towards women, because they feel like this person has kind of spat them out after chewing them up. Now, luckily, most people don't respond that way. Most people don't respond with vitriol and anger towards that. But the problem is, people are not allowed to be openly upset with a breakup or a bad separation. If you're a guy, it's more or less looked down upon by people that don't know you, as though it is somehow you having a defect instead of any number of other variables, which means the relationship could have ended either amicably or messily. But another issue is the fact that these kind of ideas only reinforce and bolster the idea that the best thing to do if you are a young man is to be completely callous and cold and disregard any sort of warmth for human attachment to anyone. I mean, let's be honest, you can talk to some of your male friends about anything that goes on inside your head, even if you're on the breaking point. But the problem is, when it comes down to the general public and how people will perceive you, if someone sees a young man at his breaking point, when all the weight of the world finally starts coming down on him like a natural disaster. His friends will be there to maybe listen to him and hear him out. However, there's also a chance he might feel like he doesn't want to burden his friends with this idea. He doesn't want to burden his friends with the concept of them worrying about him. So what he'll do is he'll internalize everything that's going on with him. Especially if you're in high school or started at your college. A person in the late teens or early 20s, they are more likely to be willing to bury and conceal every bit of hurt they're going through, because in their mind it's a far more efficient way to get through life. Now, there are two kinds of men in the world. There are the implosive men, and then there are the explosive men. And both can be equally devastating in their own measure. The explosive man will finally have an episode, whether it be they will just lash out at someone verbally or physically, or they will just do something completely fucking horrendous because they just snap under all the psychological strain that the world and that their particular responsibilities have put them through. And then there's the implosive. The implosive will not be violent or snippy or be aggressive with anyone, even if the people who they're communicating with or surrounded by have overtly hurt them in ways that they feel like they shouldn't need to say anything because they feel like the way they've been hurt is profound enough to have left enough of an impact for other people to question why does there suddenly being so quiet. The implosive is the person who's going to slowly start withdrawing more and more and more, pulling away from their friends, their family, their loved ones. They're going to start pulling away from everyone, including people who they would usually let into their world with not even a second thought. And the problem is when someone starts doing that, they are at their breaking point. They are essentially at such a point where they just feel like they don't mean shit to anyone. They will literally withdraw themselves from everything and everyone because they personally feel like their involvement in the lives of another or their involvement in an event is only considered to be a burden or an issue for everyone around them. So they just try to disconnect themselves from everything that they're part of, because in their mind, them not being around is a net benefit for everyone involved because they're terrified of finding out what people actually think of them. The male anxiety and depression issue is such a big issue because when you're on the edge of a panic attack because your nervous system is it's basically going into overdrive, just trying to keep you together. Because you're under such mental strain about everything that goes on around you that you just cannot bear the thought of taking on another responsibility or the thought of doing another task which may seem like it's insurmountable for one individual to do when they're in that particular state of mind. And the issue with the representation of male depression is that it's not represented very well. Like female depression and male depression looks different because men are taught that their feelings don't matter to the public at large, so they don't say anything. Even if they're fucking dying inside. Even if everything they're going through is slowly eating them alive. And they can't bear the thought of trying to push through another day where everything they feel like every endeavor they do is meaningless. People who are in relationships, sometimes they might feel like the relationship is them weighing down the other person. They feel like they're just hindering the other person's life because their presence in it might be slowing them down or stopping them from achieving a goal they might have a far greater chance of achieving without them constantly being in the way or beside them. Men often, especially married men or even men in long-term relationships, often wonder if their wife or their wife-to-be, or even their girlfriend, sometimes wonders if there's just someone else better out there. And a lot of this is unfortunately popularized and reinforced by social media and pop culture, because every time someone ends up hearing about a friend of theirs or a friend of a friend or someone online that suddenly just loses interest in a relationship, and they just start disconnecting from the relationship because they'd rather find someone that's new and exciting. And the concept of being discarded like that makes a lot of men just turn completely off from the idea of being open with someone about their feelings. Men disconnect because they feel like if they get too close to someone, it's basically just going to make it that much easier for someone to tear their ribs open and rip their heart out of them. And the problem is, due to the fact that male depression and male suicide are not taken seriously by really anyone except people like men's rights activists who actually want there to be some kind of addressing this. Male depression is when you smile through it all, despite the fact that inside you feel like you've been hollowed out and you're just sitting in a pit somewhere, screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming, but no one fucking hears you. Because you can't vocalize the pain you've been through. The pain you might be going through presently. And it's because of that a lot of people just say, fuck it, I'm not going to try to be upfront with anyone about how I feel because no one's going to care anyway. Because the true harsh reality is that society conditions people to be indifferent to how another person is impacted or afflicted with their problems, so long as the person at large is not adversely affected by the other person's ordeals. But the problem is it also starts to kind of normalize and, I guess, trivialize what happens when male depression and male anxiety are essentially treated like they're just jokes that someone might see in a sitcom. More often than not, a male suffering with anxiety or depression is often played for laughs here and there. And it's not that I'm against dark jokes, it's just the problem is it's one thing to make one or two jokes about it. It's another thing, however, when the person's entire catalog of jokes about the subject more or less revolve around belittling it and treating it like it's not an important detail that people's sons go through, people's brothers go through, people's fathers go through, people's cousins go through, people's husbands and boyfriends go through. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people will complain, all man want is sex. Let's be honest. If I was offered 3 hours of sex with the missus, full stop, or having her just sit there and tell me everything will be fine, you're doing the best you can. It's okay to not always be your best. It's okay to stumble and fall just so long as you get back up. I would rather hear that from her than just have the physical intimacy, because sometimes the emotional connection is more important. A lot of men they want to feel like they have value. They just want to feel appreciated and needed. Because we're essentially taught that as a society that if we don't have a purpose, if we don't have a role to fill, then we don't have value as a human being. And the problem is people like Andrew Tate and people much like the Manosphere motherfuckers, more or less, they reinforce that idea. And the worst part is, because they reinforce that idea, young men who might be struggling with their mental health and social issues will see these people as those who should be looked up to and respected. But they're not. They're people that the common man will look at and say, wow, look at that douche with the stupid looking car. Who cares? But truth be told, men are not alright. And I don't think they're really ever going to be alright. Because every single time someone wants to be treated as though they are a human being, They are instead treated as though they are a machine that suits one particular purpose, and anything outside of the purpose that's been assigned to them has no meaning. Now, to all the guys out there that are currently struggling, maybe you're not sure what your purpose is. Maybe sometimes you feel like you don't want to get up in the morning again because you realize that it's just one giant cycle, repeating itself over and over and over again. You'll make it through this. It won't be easy. And if you need to cry, if you need to scream, if you need to do anything at all that gets the anger and pain and confusion out of yourself, it's better to do that and talk to someone about it than it is to do something horrible to other people because of it. You are not alone. You do have value as a person. And it's okay to not really know what your life is right now. Everyone feels lost here and there. But the best thing to do is to try to reach out to someone that can help you. And please do that before you hurt someone else or yourself.